Mike Davis, he's a founder and president of the Article 3 Project and a former chief counsel for nominations to former Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley. Mike, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
What did you think of Judge Jackson's performance this week, Mike?
She went from a glide path to confirmation before this week to I think she's in trouble. And I don't think that even the senators in Washington, D.C. realize how much she's in trouble yet, because I think the American people tuned in and they didn't like what they heard at all. They didn't like the fact that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has a 25-year record of advocating for leniency for sex offenders of kids. That goes all the way back to Harvard Law School, when she published a note for the Harvard Law Review arguing essentially that sex offender registries are unconstitutionally punitive. It follows her to the Sentencing Commission, where she served as the vice chair from 2010 to 2014. The Sentencing Commission is the policy-making body for the U.S. government that recommends sentencing ranges for Congress and prosecutors. She took it on her own initiative while she was there in 2012 to gin up this issue that people who possess and distribute child pornography should not be punished as harshly as we punish them. We have 5-year mandatory minimum sentences imposed by Congress because of weak liberal judges and prosecutors who didn't want to take this threat seriously. This was back in 2010. As you said, she ginned this up. She brought in expert witnesses in 2010, and she came up with this theory that if they are collecting child pornography, they're not pedophiles somehow, and so therefore they're not dangerous to kids, and therefore they shouldn't be punished so harshly. That was her theory. The expert witnesses that the Sentencing Commission called in at the time, including a doctor from Columbia University, strongly disputed that. There was no evidence to support her theory. Nonetheless, that theory became a key finding in a 2012 report from the Sentencing Commission, and that report is what judges cite to, including Judge Jackson. When she went on the bench, she cites to this rationale from this report to sentence people below the sentencing guidelines, below the recommended sentencing ranges. She's had 7 cases as a district court judge. When she was a district court judge for 8 years, she had around 100 sentencing of felons. 7 of them were people who collected people who possessed and distributed child pornography, which is a pretty high number. The national average is like less than 2%. All 7 times she sentenced the pedophiles. She doesn't even consider them pedophiles. She sentenced the pedophiles to below the guidelines and below the recommended sentence from the prosecutor. And here's the key of all this. One of these guys faced up to 10 years in prison. She sentenced him to 3 months in prison. She didn't order that he stay away from the computer when he got out, and then he reoffended. We just found at the Article 3 research that he reoffended in 2019 when he should have been in prison, but for the fact that Judge Jackson went soft on his sentence.
Yeah, and I've seen all of this, what you're talking about, and it shocks the conscience to hear it again. But Mike, you said at the outset that you believe that her nomination is in trouble. Right now, what appears to be occurring is that Democrats are circling the wagons and are saying that she has to be defended at all costs. The media is casting any criticism, any questioning of her as sexist and racist, and using that to shield her from concerns about her nomination. And as far as we can tell, there are no Democrat defections at this moment. Why do you think her nomination's in peril?
So I ran Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation from the Senate Judiciary Committee. A lot can change in a week and a half, but we are about a week and a half out from her floor vote on the Senate floor. And this is an issue where people are tuning in for the first time, and they're hearing that we have a nominee for the highest court in our land for a lifetime appointment, and she has a 25-year record of coddling sex offenders of kids. And that just does not sit well with people. And they hear that, and it's shocking at first, and they don't want to believe it because the media and Democrats, basically the Democrats and the media, tell them not to believe it. They put out these bogus fact checks at the Washington Post and elsewhere. The issue is I'm going to keep pounding this issue. So is Josh Hawley. So is Ted Cruz. The American people need to know the truth about this, and they need to call their senators and say, look, you should not support someone who thinks that we're too soft on child pornography. You got to this point at the beginning of this call. This is really important. She's arguing because technology has changed that we should have less sentences for these people because it's easier to get child porn. It should be the other way around. Like, we have high-speed internet around the world. We have smartphones around the world with high-definition cameras on them. It is much easier to make, to share, to watch child pornography. And remember, there are victims here. Child pornography is child rape. These kids cannot consent to this. And we're seeing an explosion of child pornography, especially in the third world, because we have creeps in America who are watching this stuff, and they wouldn't be watching this stuff if we had greater deterrence, or it'd be much less likely that they would watch this stuff if we had greater deterrence. We need higher sentences, not lower sentences.
Mike, having worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I want to ask kind of about some of the possibilities here. One of them is this idea, because it's a split Senate, Republicans have the power to deny the Democrats a quorum in the Judiciary Committee, and this will submarine her nomination. Do you think that's likely? Can you envision Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee just not showing up and blocking her from making it any further in this process?
The only way that this nomination stops, is if there is a groundswell of American people lighting up the Senate switchboard and demanding to talk to their home state senators' offices and telling their home state senators' offices in no way, shape, or form should you support this nomination. It can't just be the Republicans. It needs to be all of them. And they need to send a message to the Joe Manchins of West Virginia and the Kirsten Sinemas of Arizona and all the Democrats who are in red or swing states who are up for re-election this year, that this will be a costly vote if you vote to confirm this nominee. She has disqualified herself to the Supreme Court based upon this pattern of coddling sex abusers of kids. It's deeply disturbing. You just ask yourself this: does someone like this share your values? And the Democrats run on their empathy standard. They can't talk about their judicial philosophy because their judicial philosophy is basically that the left wins every time. So they make up this so-called empathy standard. So think about the empathy here. She empathizes with terrorists, Gitmo terrorists who want to kill Americans, and now child sex predators.
It is remarkable. So additionally, I think you kind of got to my next question, but are there Democrats that you can envision? Is it Kirsten Sinema? Is it Joe Manchin who are open enough to pressure from their constituents to change their minds on going along with Ketanji Brown Jackson?
So Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema pretend like they're moderates, but when it comes to these key votes, they almost always fall in line, right? And the only time that they don't fall in line is when Chuck Schumer gives them permission not to fall in line. So unlike Republicans, Senate Democrats are very disciplined, right? But if there is enough political pressure, if people are, and this is important, if people pick up the phone, call into the Senate switchboard, 202-224-3121, if they call into that Senate switchboard and light them up and actually call them, not an email call, it makes it where these senators start to sweat and they realize, oh man, my constituents back home are paying attention to this vote.
Right. So that actually matters. I think a lot of people listening to this probably think to themselves, man, I've placed calls before. I feel like it just goes to nowhere. But you're saying that constituent response actually does get attention from senators.
It doesn't. You call no one cares about other states, other senators' constituents. Call your home state senators, 202-224-3121. Talk to both home state senators' offices and tell them to oppose Judge Jackson's nomination. Is that simple. And when senators are getting a flood of phone calls from their constituents back home, it makes them pause. It makes them pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of good reasons to oppose this nomination. Another that stands out to me is just her sheer inability to admit what's obvious to even a kindergartner, that like a woman exists. That whole question from Marsha Blackburn this week, hey, could you define a woman? and her attempting to bow out and say, well, no, I can't. I'm not a biologist. That was pretty embarrassing. And I think a clear sign that if you can't even answer basic questions about stuff that we all can see with our eyes, then you should be nowhere near interpreting the United States Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, she could have even said something like this. Look, I know what a woman means in everyday life and in everyday meaning. I just have to be careful because there are challenges to Title VII. There are challenges to Title IX where, people are bringing these transgender challenges to these laws. So I just have to be careful that I don't step into a legal pitfall here. But yeah, I get what you're saying. But this whole absurd response from her, this indignant response, shows to me that she's a lot more of a woke leftist than I expected, right? I thought that she would be a more serious nominee, and I was floored by her response.
All right, Mike Davis, he's the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, former chief counsel to Chuck Grassley on the Judiciary Committee. Mike, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.